join together. We're on page 128. Looking in your prayer book, the lower right corner, use the brackets if you have to choose. Page 128. Hachama Merosh. Hachama Merosh. Ilanot nistaneka. Again, page 128. Hachama merosh ha'ilano nistaleka bo'u v'netzeh likrat Shabbat HaMalka. There's lots of room to my left, everyone. Shabbat Shalom again.
Shabbat Shalom. Let's all take a deep breath. Whatever has been this week for you, it has disappeared with the setting sun. And we collectively have entered a new realm of space-time called Shabbat. And this is our sanctuary, our palace in time, in which we get to step inside and put down the burdens of the week and refresh ourselves with our breathing, with our singing, with our praying, with our hearts turning toward the sense of oneness that our prayers are all about. We're going to have an interesting evening tonight in that we're going to start with Kabbalat Shabbat as we always do. A chance to put down the week, a chance to celebrate being alive, a chance to sing together in community, a chance to enter the experience of renewal that is Shabbat. We'll have our Mariv service, as we always do. And then we're going to have a chance to hear from 4 of our members who so kindly and bravely said yes when I said, would you come and bring your heart, your feelings about Israel so we can hear from you, we can hear your voice. So we're going to have a chance to hear from them. It's a chance for us all to connect and reconnect with the questions that are in our hearts and the feelings that are in our hearts about Israel right now. And then we're going to have a chance after that to celebrate all the good things that are happening in our lives because it's a new month, which is the thing we do on the first Shabbat of the month. We have a little moment for people to say out loud wonderful things happening in your life, things that you want to celebrate. And then we'll close our service in the ways that we always do with Aleinu and with Kaddish. So that's a preview of what's coming. But all of that's to say that right now, we're just in Kabbalat Shabbat. All that complexity that's coming soon, no, right now, it's just Shabbat. And we're alive and we're here, and the week is over and the sun's set, and that means we're invited into this beautiful sanctuary in space and in time. And we get to breathe differently, and we get to be differently, and we get to feel differently, and we get to remember all the things that are actually important when we put down the work of the world. So use these prayers and these songs to release those things, to get all the way here, to feel yourself alive. We continue on page 130 with Lechu Neranana. Come, let us sing out together.
Turn me up, stars, L'Adonai, Naria, Retzui Sheinu, Nekadem Afanav, Betodah. Page 131. Shiru L'Adonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru L'Adonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru L'Adonai, Baruchu Shemo, Basru, Miyom Leyom Yeshuato, Sapru Vagoyim, Kevodo, Bechol Ha'amim, Nifleotav, Ki Gadol Adonai, Ume'ulam Me'od, Norahu, Al Kol Elohim, Ay, 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 Ki Kol Elohei Ha'amim Elili, V'Adonai Shamayim Asa, Hod V'Hadar Lefanav, Oz V'Tiferet B'Mikdasho, Yismechu Hashamayim V'Tagel Haaretz, Yeram Hayam U'Melo, Yalo Sadai, V'Chol Asher Bo, Az Yiranenu, Kol Atzeyah, Lifnei Adonai, Kiva, Kiva, Yishpot Haaretz, Yishpot Tevel B'Tzedek, Ve'amim B'Emunato. Ay, alay, lay, alalay, alalay, lay, lalay, ay, alay, lalay, ay, 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 lay, ay, 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 ay. 132. Adonai malach tagel haaretz, ישמחו עם רבים, ענן וערפל סביביו, צדק ומשפט מכון כיסו, אוהבי אדוני שנאו רע, שומר נפשות חסידיו מיד רשעים יצילם, כל זרו על הצדיק וישרה לב שמחה, שמחו צדיקים באדוני והודו לזכר קודשו. 133 מזמור שירו לאדוני שיר חדש, כי נפלאות עשה, הושיענו ידינו זרוע קודשו הודיע, אדוני ישועתו לעיני הגויים גילה צדקתו, זכה חסדו ואמונתו לבית ישראל, ראו כל ארצי הארץ את ישועת אלוהינו, הריעו לאדוני כל הארץ, פצתו ורננו וזמרו, זמרו לאדוני בכינור, בכינור בכל זמרה, בחצוצרות בקול שופר, הריעו לפני המלך, אדוני רם הים ומלואו, תבל ויושבי בה, להרון עמך וכף, יחד הרים ירננו לפני אדוני כי בא לשפוט הארץ, ישפוט תבל בצדק ועמים במישרים, יאללה Allah la la ya la la, Allah ya la 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 la, Allah ya la 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 ya ya la, Allah ya la 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 la. Page 137 in the middle. Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo, Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo. Ay, 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 vashalom. Ay, 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 vashalom, vashalom. Ay, 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 vashalom. Ay, 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 vashalom. One of the things I've gotten to do this last week is have my initial meetings with new B'nai Mitzvah students. And because it's the beginning of a new secular year, many of those students are our sixth graders for whom this is brand new. And I know that there are some B'nai Mitzvah students here among us as well. And one of the first things that I say in that meeting is that becoming B'nai Mitzvah is really sort of a practice. It's a regimen that's about building muscle memory. And I ask them, what's muscle memory? And they tell me what it means, right? It's one of those things that you do without having to think about it. And all of us right now are doing something that involves muscle memory. It's breathing. How often do we stop and think about how to breathe? Those of us who have ever had issues breathing know that we can never take it for granted, that our bodies just know what to do. And so let's just take a few moments trusting our bodies right now, trusting our bodies to breathe when they should, just together for a few moments before we continue. Page 138. Lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor vezachor b'dibur echad השמיענו אל המיוחד אדוני אחד ושמו אחד לשם ותפארת ולתהילה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה כי מכל הברכה מראש מקרב נסוכה סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה קומי צאי מתוך אפיך רב לך שבט בעמק הבכה והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת Verse 5 התעוררי, התעוררי כי באורך קומי אורי, אורי, אורי שידברי כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לך אדוני לקראת קהלה Verse 9, the bottom of 139. בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. Stay standing. לך דודי לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת קהלה פני שבת Just a little bit more לך דודי לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת קהלה פני שבת נקבלה Page 144, we remain standing. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemet Rabba, Belma Divrach, Ilute, Yamlich, Machute, Bechayechon, Uvyomechon, Uvchayedechol, Beit Yisrael, Bagala, Bagala, Uvizmanka, Veimeru, Amen, Yehesh Merabba Mevarach, לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה
ברכו את אדוני המבורך. Baruch Adonai mevorach leolam vahed. We may be seated, page 148. Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uven laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo. El Chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu leolam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai, ham'ariv aravim. 150. Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael, amecha ahavta. Torah אותנו לימדת, על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו וקומנו נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגע יומם ולילה. באהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמי. ברוך אתה בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך. 154. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Page 158. Our friend Stas is playing with the reverb of my voice. Let's see if we can play with the reverb of our voices together in this call and response melody. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha נדר בקודש נורא תהי לו עושה פלא מלכותך ראו בניך בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים זלי ענו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ונאמר גבעת אדוני את יעקב גאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Our service now takes a bit of a turn from joyous and upbeat and celebratory and grateful to really pleading for safety, protection, for people who need shelter, for maybe us, maybe we need some kinds of shelter, some kinds of feeling of safety tonight or this week. Maybe people we think of out there who need shelter from bombs, or who need shelter from cold, or need shelter from hunger, need to be warm and safe and have enough and be loved. So we pray Hashkivenu for the collective, for all the people who need shelter and safety. And then we go from there to Misha Berach for specific people we think of who need healing. And we'll pause in the middle of that prayer and make space for you to say out loud any names of people you're thinking about who need healing. By saying their name, you're adding them to the prayer, and you're also reminding yourself, oh yeah, I could make a phone call, I could hold their hand, I could help them feel a little more loved. That's what we'll do for now.
Page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ותקננו בעצה טובה מלפניך והושיענו למען שמך והגן בעדנו והסר מעלינו אויב תבל וחרב ורעה ויגון והרחק ממנו עוון והפשע ובצל כנפיך תסתירנו כי אל שומרנו מצילנו אתה כי אל חנון רחום אתה ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל Bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
We pray for healing for the people we name now. Pray together.
Mekor habracha lavotenu. May the source of strength bless the ones before. We'll add some extra blessing. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say,
We turn to page 162 for Vishamru. we rise, we sing that together, and then we go into our silent Amidah.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. ארץ אחרת, גם אם אדמתי בוערת, רק מילה בעברית חודרת אל אורכי, אל נשמתי, בגוף כואב, בלב רעב, כאן הוא ביתי. לא אשתוק כי ארצי שינתה את פניה, לא אוותר לה, אזכיר לה ואשיר כאן באוזניה, עד שתפקח את עיניה. From the beginning. אין לי ארץ אחרת, גם אם אדמתי בוערת, רק מילה בעברית חודרת אל אורכי, אל נשמתי, בגוף כואב, בלב רעב, כאן הוא ביתי. לא אשתוק כי ארצי שינתה את פניה, לא אבטל לה, אזכיר לה ואשיר כאן באוזניה, עד שתפקח את פניה. אין לי ארץ אחרת, אין לי ארץ אחרת.
Thank you, Canterbritzer, for bringing us such a beautiful way into this conversation. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, I invited 4 of our members to speak about Israel in this moment from their hearts. And they've prepared beautiful words for us. To frame the conversation, I want to say a couple things about this week's Parsha. We're in the last Parsha of the book of Genesis. This is Parsha Vayechi, it's when Jacob dies. And it's the first moment when we have the beginning of being a diaspora people. The people who are going to be next are going to be born not having lived in Israel. They're going to be diaspora people. And it's interesting because also in this parsha, we have Jacob and Joseph ask that their body and bones, be brought back to Israel, that they are not satisfied being diaspora people. They had to go there for a specific reason, and there was a famine, and ultimately their hearts, their eyes, their souls, their being is still pointing toward Eretz Yisrael. It's still pointing there, and they need to be buried there. And a pledge is made to both of them that they will be buried there. And that combination of, in this parsha, the whole people Israel are living outside of Israel. That's not our reality now at all, but we are living outside of Israel. There might be somebody here who's living in Israel, but most of us here are not. And so we're looking at this situation from here, which is a particular vantage point. And a number of our speakers speak about that. But also this same way that Jacob and Joseph were saying, I don't leave me here. Bring me back there. I belong there. There's a part of me that's tethered to that place. I am connected there always. Even if hundreds of years are going to pass, I still have a belongingness there. I still feel connected there. is the song that you just had us sing. So that's a frame from our parsha, and now I'm not gonna say more. You get to hear from me all the time, and specifically, I am the main person here who speaks about Israel. I've been in the newspaper about it. I've spoken since this latest government came to be, and it is my job to speak kind of on behalf of the congregation. And I know that when I speak, many people here agree with my general perspective, but not everyone does. We have a bigger range of views than that, and it's really important to me that both things happen. That it's my job to speak from a particular vantage point, and it's also my job to hold open the space so that you don't have to agree with me to fully belong here and have space to share what you think and have space to be with others across differences. And we have actually over time tried to really build our muscles of like being able to be in conversation with each other across our differences of perspective, even if they're really, really strongly felt, to be able to still be in community with each other in that full range. And at the end, I want to remember to say a little bit about what's going to come next after this night, because there's going to be a chance to really engage in some of the questions about Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship with really an expert that we are lucky enough to have in our membership, Rabbi Josh Weinberg. So, but first, let me turn it over to our four speakers, and they are going to be in this order: Eyal Yavin, Asya Goodman, Anna Raskowit-Paz, and Neil Corwin. All right? And I just want to also thank them so much because I asked and they said yes. Thank you, each of you.
Can you hear me? Good evening. In 1967, as a 15-year-old boy, during the Six-Day War, I was mobilized into a war effort. The other teens and I took over the day-to-day responsibility in the kibbutz when our fathers went to war. Not long after that, I was introduced to the ideas of Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich, an Orthodox public intellectual and a professor at Hebrew University. His voice resonated with me as he cautioned that Zionism and the State of Israel became more important than Jewish values. In an address to IDF top officers, Leibovich warned against the dehumanization effect of occupation. He said, and I quote, "The national pride and euphoria following the Six-Day War is temporary and will transform our proud and rising nation to an extreme messianic nationalism. The third phase will be descend into depravity, and the last phase is the end of Zionism." And yet, as son of kibbutz, groomed to be leader in the IDF, I was prepared to fulfill my duty. I went to the army with a will to sacrifice despite my growing ambivalence. I went armed with the belief that we were defending a haven for Jews and building a better world. I joined a combat unit and went to an officer course, as expected from a son of Israeli pioneer generation. From late 1969 to 1974, I served in the IDF. In the Sinai War of Attention, of attention, and then the Yom Kippur War. In the occupied territory in Gaza and the West Bank, I witnessed the disintegration of Jewish values as warned by Leibovich. It did not take me long to recognize the growing moral rot. question our role as occupiers, in occupation. After the Yom Kippur War, I became a supporter of the two-state solution. This was because of both my personal experience with the violence of occupation and also my growing and strong belief that one state will be, in the end of the day, almost surely a Palestinian Muslim state and not an Israeli Jewish state. This felt and continued to feel inevitable. Today, much of the young elite fighting forces are modern Orthodox Jews with strong nationalistic point of view. So in addition to the feeling of the duty we felt as young soldiers, they believe that God gave the land of Israel to the Jews who have the absolute exclusive right to this land. This makes any chance for negotiation or peace with Palestinian Arabs impossible. Furthermore, the possibility of a right-wing military coup cannot be dismissed. Israel is now an illiberal theocracy with official racial policies, but this outcome is not surprising. The sane secular view of negotiated agreement has faded and no longer looked possible. I agree with the word of Ami Ayalon, a retired Navy commander and the former head of the Mossad. He does not blame Israel's past exclusively on the ultra-religious settler and the handful of armed rabbis who occupied the West Bank. Ayalon say that we were led here by a secular majority motivated by fear and propelled by silence. I've been living in the US since 1980, and yet Israel is my home. I cannot cut Israel out of my life, nor my accent. The kibbutz, the Galilee, my father arriving in Palestine at the age of 12 as an orphaned refugee. My maternal grandparents in Little Tel Aviv, the army, the country that has shaped me in ways I can't even identify, because it is simply who I am. I cannot give up on my homeland, but I cannot support a country that is a racist religious theocracy either. I do believe that in the end, without a change of direction, this will lead to the destruction of the State of Israel. As a supporter of a democratic Israel, we not only have the right, but the responsibility to influence this outcome. We must not remain silent. Thank you.
Asia.
I'm a little shorter. Hi, I'm Asia Gelfen-Goodman, Rabbi Timoner, Rabbi Josh, Rabbi Steph, Cantor Josh, if anyone else I missed, and fellow congregates. Thank you for having me today. Shabbat Shalom and good evening. I'm here today to speak about the situation in Israel following the latest election and the forming of the latest Israeli government. Let me say this up front. I am not happy about this government. It does not contain a single party in the coalition that I would have voted for, and no part of it represents who I am. It includes criminals, and it is led by a power-hungry megalomaniac. I absolutely condemn Itamar Ben-Gvir's, the newly minted Minister of National Security, and his latest provocation on Temple Mount. We were there just this past summer, and it is a place where peace is very, very delicately preserved by both sides. I am what you call a secular Israeli. I'm an atheist. And I served in the Israeli Navy, yes. And had I stayed in Israel, my vote would have been for Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid party. the party that led the previous coalition. Liberal, Jewish, democratic, sane and reasonable, suitable for the modern world, creative when it comes to forming the government, and giving a voice to a diverse set of parties and individuals. That was the last coalition. Most importantly, a Zionist party and not a party that capitulates to those who seek to destroy Israel. But with tonight's conversation happening here, due to this new government, before we dive into it, I also want to express a couple of things that I am perplexed about as we are here in CBE. I am perplexed as to why there is so little, if any, conversations here in Israel, in CBE, about Israel in the last year and a half of this pretty revolutionary Lapid-Bennett government. I don't remember any. Do we only discuss Israel when its government is not to our liking? I'm also perplexed why the situation in Israel wasn't discussed so urgently when Jewish people were under rocket fires during the conflicts with Gaza in 2019 and 2021. My family was there in Ashdod, witnessing it from their balcony. My family and I here in the US wrote multiple emails asking CBE leadership to take a stand. The stand was usually taken with some delay and hesitantly. And also why Israel as a topic of focus is taught in our Hebrew school only in 8th grade, when most kids are done with their bar bat mitzvah studies and they're likely to leave and therefore not learn much. And I should acknowledge that this is something that is finally being reconsidered. But in general, there is a lot more to discuss about Israel other than its politics. There are startups, technology, culture, food, gender innovations in the Hebrew language. Why are we not discussing any of these here at CBE? But back to our original new government topic. You may be wondering why majority of Israelis voted either for Bibi or one of the religious parties, and you really can't escape the numbers here. In order to understand this, we should really take a step back and understand where the anger and the skepticism of Israelis is coming from in order to support this kind of government. I personally made Aliyah from the former Soviet Union in 1990 straight into the Gulf War. My hometown, my new hometown of Ramat Gan, was heavily bombed by Saddam Hussein for a couple of months. Quick reminder, at the time, we all believed that he had biological weapons. So imagine the horror with each rocket that fell. I, as an 11-year-old, and my family, we sat in our gas masks and waited for radio announcements each time, holding our breath. Was there gas in there or not? Here we were, only 45 years after the Holocaust was over at the time, being bombed mainly and only really because we were Jewish. In mid-90s, when I was in high school, we were all glued to our TVs during the peace process of 1993 and 1995. Described by Edward Said as the Palestinian Versailles, we had a lot of hope for it. My generation, we believed that by the time we will have children, they will not have to serve in the army because there will be peace with all of our neighbors. Clearly didn't happen. But you know what else marked my high school years? Suicide bombings, a lot of them. On buses, in pizza parlors, in a university, on streets closed for Purim carnivals, with nails and shrapnels, blowing up among children and young mothers, designed to hurt as much as possible. Do you know what Dolphinarium represents to Israelis of my generation? Not a place with dolphins. It was a disco club on Tel Aviv beachfront, in front of which on June 1st, 2001, a suicide bomber blew himself up in a crowd of kids. 21 were killed, 16 of them were teenagers. Hundreds were with injuries and PTSD for life. Majority of them were like me, Jewish kids from the former Soviet Union. These suicide bombings did not stop because of the peace process, unfortunately, but they were stopped because of the security fence that was built around the West Bank. It was built by the right-wing government of Ariel Sharon. Walls make good neighbors. They are not sexy. It's easy to complain about the border crossings. They are not perfect, but they do save lives. They saved Jewish lives. And they saved Jewish lives. And in 2004, the year I moved to the US actually, if you remember, we unilaterally left Gaza. We pulled out. But instead of Palestinians rejoicing about their new sovereignty, they chose to dig tunnels and shoot rockets. And then wonder why they're living in what they like to call an open-air prison. And I get, many of you think it's a complex situation, and it's much more complex than what I'm saying, but not really. The Gaza pullout, by the way, was also executed by a right-wing government of Ariel Sharon. That same Ariel Sharon, which is by no way perfect, done tons of terrible stuff as well, but it had to be done, and he knew it. He knew that he had to give it a chance. But in return, as I said, we got tunnels, kidnappings, and rockets. Make no mistakes, the rockets from Gaza are fired on Jews because they are Jews. We have no partner in peace on the Palestinian side. We were duped. We upheld our part of the bargain. We got out. We have been providing water and electricity ever since then. I don't know if anyone knows this. But in return, we get rockets. By the way, did you know that last year, while we didn't have any official conflicts, 1,162 rockets were sent to Israel from Gaza? And does anyone know where the town of Sderot is located? Raise your hand if you know it. Thank you. It is less than a mile from Gaza. It is the closest town that's located to the Gaza border. Citizens of Sderot are constantly under rocket fire. Days off, some days, more than others. But it is citizens of Sderot and other towns near that border that voted for this new government. Because historically, right-wing governments were able to execute and provide safety. You may have also noticed that no one talks anymore about the Arab-Israeli conflict. It doesn't exist. We have peace agreements with Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, and other Arab countries are on the way. Many of these treaties, by the way, were executed by right-wing governments, even by Bibi himself. But with Palestinians, there is no one to talk to. So this is why Israel shifted to the right. Many of our friends who have always lived in Tel Aviv area, the heart of the left in Israel, have shifted from Meretz and Labor towards the right. Some shifted to center with Lapid and some to the very right with Bibi, almost right. Perhaps it also has to do with rockets from Gaza now reaching Tel Aviv. The true left parties just can't be trusted anymore. They simply don't get the job done. After continuous rockets from Gaza, even during somewhat peaceful times, the Sderots of Israel are angry, and rightfully so. Security comes before anything else. And here we had a centrist government, good government, but it included Israeli Arabs, among other parties, who did not do anything to help, and it's a government that could not stop the rockets. So the Sderots of Israel have voted to the right. And the reality of it is that the policies, the foreign policy of Bibi and Yair Lapid are actually not very different. They could have formed a pretty decent government together without the religious and without the far right and religious right. But unfortunately, they won't work together. In conclusion, the reason why we have this lousy government is because the Palestinian peace process has failed. The left wing has evaporated and just didn't execute. Rockets are still flying into Israel, and the centrist parties and Likud cannot find a common ground. And historically, right-wing governments had a history really of delivering. Begin, Sharon, and Bibi. They delivered peace agreements that worked, and they delivered security. Think about what you would have prioritized if you were living in Sderot, if you were living under rocket fire. I am, of course, worried about education in Israel. I'm worried about the brain drain, secular people leaving Israel for other opportunities. I am worried about LGBT rights. I'm worried about women's rights. I'm worried about the rights of Arab minorities, majority of whom are citizens of Israel and would prefer to remain such. But I and you all have the luxury to worry about this at the safety of our own homes. I'm also worried that Zionism has already become a topic of debate in places like CBE, and that this government may make the situation much worse. And it is exactly why places like CBE should focus on Israel early on in its Hebrew school curriculum, and most importantly, having an honest conversation about Israel. A discussion that's thoughtful, balanced, and shows factual context. And that should encourage our children and our members to feel connected to Israel and feel why it's important for Jews in America to be part of the future of the Jewish homeland. This is probably more important now than it's ever. Thank you. Toda rabba and Shabbat Shalom.
Anna.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So my perspective is really quite different, and I want to thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I was a little surprised by your invitation because about Israel, I don't know much more than what's being covered in the news, and I also know a little bit about the minds that conceived of it and why they did, and the events that sparked its birth. So I'm going to keep it personal. As a few of you know, I'm half French. And as all of you know, France played a huge role in the creation of Israel. I personally was raised steeped in that history at school and in books and at home. So there was never a chance that my teachers or my family would ever let us forget why Israel is there. But France is also a nation of immigrants, especially of North African and Middle Eastern descent. So I grew up between my country's responsibility for the past towards the Jews and the ongoing discourse about Israel's policies and the Palestinian struggle. The reality is that the first Intifada made some sense to French public opinion. Still, no one questioned the existence of Israel. Israeli leaders at the time seemed reasonable. Palestinian leaders appeared at times to want to try to be reasonable. We assumed good faith, maybe naively. I was 15 when they killed Yitzhak Rabin. I'm not going to try to describe the dismay we felt, because I'm sure you saw it here too. It was as if they had killed hope. And when we learned that his death had come not at the hands of the terrorists of Hamas and Hezbollah, but a far-right Jewish extremist, it was like we'd been electrocuted. And Israel should just be allowed to be Israel, right? But like it or not, it's not. It's a crucible for the West's guilt and shame, and for the developing world's pain and rancor. And it's not fair. I don't think it's fair. But Israel does crystallize too many of our aspirations and our failures. That's a lot to carry for this tiny slice of land in the Middle East. But could we really expect that a Jewish nation would be treated like a regular country in all of its messed upness? And everyone has an opinion about this. We must, because we're Jews. But I wanted to understand more. I didn't expect it to be this hard to even find definitive, objective sources. And that's only step one, and it is my job, like this is my day job, to kind of delve into the research, into scholarly research. And still I couldn't, because everywhere I looked, I got hit by everybody else's passion. When it comes to Israel, cool heads never prevail. And I can't really think clearly about it. So all I can do is go back to the beginning, try to think of why Israel happened in the first place. And it was dreamed up as a home for Jews because Jews desperately needed it, still do. It was born at the same time as what is now the European Union, which is another project that I am profoundly attached to. And very much for the same reasons, for the same goals, to ensure its people's peace and safety. And if we're not defending until the end the right of peoples to peace and safety and a home, I don't know what we're doing. A minuscule Jewish state nestled between several hostile Arab countries was always going to have its work cut out for it. But one thing many early Zionists seemed to intuit, to understand, was that peace and safety cannot exist unless you work to make it peaceful and safe for your neighbors too. You must shed a little of your power for that to happen, because where there's isolation, there can't be peace. Where there's supremacy, there can't be safety. Where there's anxiety and suspicion and rigidity, there can't be gratitude or vision, let alone solutions. The EU has taught us Europeans that interdependence forces nations into prosperity. Division leads nowhere. Just look at Brexit. But far too many Israeli and Palestinian, not just Israeli, and Palestinian interests are tied up in shunning compromise. But on the Israeli side, which is the one that we're concerning ourselves with tonight, as it hardens against Palestinians, the new government is also hardening against its citizens. Restraining the judiciary, I'm going to go through the list, removing protections for women, LGBTQ people, which is a cause that is very near and dear to us, and other minorities, and emboldening extremists. Only yesterday, 1,000 Palestinians were evicted from yet another hamlet in the West Bank. And on Wednesday, a pair of religious teenage Jews were filmed desecrating a Christian cemetery in Jerusalem. And I don't want to be glib, but in what world can Jews afford to start that fire? I worry that Israeli leaders may have lost sight of the original goal. I fear that they're taking this home for granted and gambling it away along with peace and safety. Justice is urgent, and I think it requires courage and imagination. But Israeli politics is on a trajectory to starve the nation of both. I don't know how we, in the diaspora, can spur a reckoning, but we're commanded never to lose hope. So if you have ideas, I'm all ears. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Shakarov. Thank you. Neil Corwin.
I have to say I was hesitant when Rachel asked me to do this, and I'm even more hesitant now. I've been struggling over the past couple of weeks to put together my thoughts about the new Israeli government. And I think it's a struggle for me because I'm uncomfortable expressing criticism of Israel. That discomfort comes in part because I'm not an Israeli. I don't have family in Israel. And I'm by no means steeped in the day-to-day of Israeli life. I certainly don't understand the complexities of parliamentary democracy. So who am I to judge? I've been to Israel once with CBE. I see some fellow travelers with me. Who am I to judge? But remaining silent doesn't seem like an option to me. There were two things about our trip to Israel that inform my views today that I wanted to share with you. First, again, as someone who hadn't been to Israel before, it was surprising to me how proud I felt about Tel Aviv when I walked its streets. It was surprising to me how emotional I became. I started to cry when I approached the Western Wall. I just didn't think that was going to happen. Again, I don't have family in Israel. I have no obvious connection to Israel. But there somehow was a connection, something that I felt very viscerally. The second thing that was striking to me was it didn't seem like the fault line in the US over Israel was the fault line occupying Israeli politics. Our fault line here in the US, CBE, seemed to center on how to address the rights of Palestinians in Israel, in the West Bank, and in Gaza. And when I got to Israel, it wasn't like those issues had somehow magically disappeared. On our trip, we spoke to a number of Palestinian Israeli citizens who expressed their heartfelt commitment to the country while decrying their second-class citizenship. We traveled to Hebron, and the military presence there was chilling. Yet on that trip, it was also striking to me, we spoke to many Jews who talked about the terror of the Second Intifada, which had ended years earlier, but that terror, the feeling of bombings intruding on daily life, was very present. And that terror, at least to me, seemed to influence what was sort of a consensus, that the Palestinian presence in Israel was a security crisis to be managed, not resolved. Resolution would have to wait to some indeterminate time when the partners for negotiation were more constructive, because Hamas and the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority were dead ends. In the face of that really evident and understandable terror, particularly as exacerbated by rocket campaigns by Hamas, who am I to judge? Since my trip to Israel, I've tried to become more educated. I've paid closer attention to articles about Israel. I listened to a weekly podcast about Israel. Rabbi Josh has been on this weekly podcast. It's called the Promise Podcast. I think it's terrific. But again, I'm not super informed. I have gained a greater understanding over the past couple of years as I've watched the succession of elections that have taken place. I've gotten a better sense of the polarizing fault lines, at least from here, that I see in Israeli politics. And they're fault lines I have strong feelings about. Fault lines over whether Israel should be a democratic state or a Jewish state, as if the two can't be harmonized. Fault lines between the ultra-religious and the secular and the less religious. Who is a Jew with a right to return to Israel? Fault lines over the authority of the judiciary, protection of minorities, and insistence on the rule of law. Fault lines most notably over whether Bibi Netanyahu should be prime minister, particularly given his ongoing corruption trials. And I think it's these polarizing fault lines. Again, I'm oceans away, but these fault lines intertwine with the Palestinian issues land us where we are today. Now, we here in the United States aren't strangers to an increasingly polarized society with many fault lines over immigrants, transgender rights, race, religion, inequality, and the list goes on. All tinged with a distinctive and unsettling feeling that we as a people are being divided into an us and a them. We're also no strangers to extremism becoming normalized. Heretofore unacceptable racist, misogynistic, anti-Semitic tropes are on their way to becoming an acceptable part of our political discourse. I don't hesitate to say this extremism, it's not acceptable. I don't hesitate to say here that the othering and dehumanizing of people is not acceptable. In Israel, the governing coalition that just was formed is premised on an us and a them, on the quote-unquote landlords who preside over tenants who have no claim of ownership, extremists, people convicted of inciting racism, people who claim to be quote-unquote proud homophobes. They've been afforded platforms, ministries from which to exert power in service of some notion of an us and a dehumanized second class of them, the other. The other being Palestinians, the other being gay and queer people, the other being Reformed Jews, and the list goes on. It is a vision of a society premised on exclusion. Again, I don't live in Israel. I don't have relatives in Israel. And I'm not as informed as maybe I should be. But I know enough to know that a society of us and them has never been good for the Jewish people. I know that dividing into a society into an us and them is directly at odds with the tenets of my faith and my most heartfelt beliefs.
Shakoa. Thank you, Neil. I know that you join me in so much gratitude to our four speakers. I want to invite someone sitting in the back to open that door, and I'll open this one. We need a little more air in here, I believe. But I know you join me in with so much gratitude to our four speakers who shared so personally and from their hearts. And you can see those were four perspectives, and there are a lot more in this room. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a lot more conversations like this. We have in the past had facilitated conversations in our community not that long ago, and we will again. And if you like this, let us know, and I'd like to do more evenings like this, because we need to hear the range of voices here, including those critical of how we do things. And we have spoken about that before, but there's room for us to disagree, and there's so much feeling here and nuance and layers to be explored. So I want to thank you. And then I also want to say that when I lived in Israel, one of the things that I most learned from the experience was that no matter what was going on, there were terrorist attacks, there were all kinds of things happening in the news, and my parents would be thinking that we were, like, all life was stopped because of a thing that they saw on the news. And what was happening in Israel was like, yes, that was happening, and also life was going on, and people were going to live, and no one was going to stop them from living, and they were going to celebrate the joys, and they were going to live life fully. And that's my way of transitioning to what we're doing next here in our service, which is that it's the first Shabbat of the month, and we, as a congregation, we stop each month to say, what's good? What's good? This is true, what's been spoken here. It's true, and it's heavy, and it's complex, and it's real. And also, life's going on. And you might have had something wonderful happen in this last month, and we're ready to celebrate it. So we're going to sing together. Oh, but before we do that, I need to make sure that you know about the dates and information about Rabbi Josh Weinberg's class, which is going to start 11 days from tonight, Tuesday night, January 17th. It will be a series of Tuesdays, 4 Tuesdays in a row, about the U.S.-Israel relationship. And Rabbi Josh Weinberg is the vice president. No, what's the title? Yes, vice president for Israel and Reform Zionism for the Union of Reform Judaism. So our whole national movement, the Reform movement, he's the Israel guy. And he's our member, like really active, awesome member of our congregation. And he has gifted us in the past with his teachings. We had a whole study and dialogue series right before the pandemic, I don't remember when, 4 years ago. And it was wonderful, and he was the teacher of it, and anybody who studied with him can tell you, like, he's an amazing teacher. So if you want to get into this conversation more soon, 11 days from tonight, 11 nights from tonight, join Rabbi Weinberg. There will be a hybrid option, so you can do on Zoom. Very nice. All right. And now, what's good? So we're going to sing Ve'al